This gives you an example of precision of dado light and how you can really get texture into shots. This is a tiny kitchen. We lit him with a 150 watt classic dado. We were shooting this during the day as well, so what we had to do is we had to ND the windows down. So I put I think it was 4 stops of ND on the window, which is a 1.2 ND. So that's a huge amount of light reduction. So I did that and then I bashed a 400D through it. You can see that shape on the cabinets on the back, that's a 400D firing through a huge amount of ND. And by reducing everything down and working with precision light, you get to paint. And as you see from these images, you know, it's quite a painterly image, there's lots of texture there. So by specialising and by lighting, that's how you set yourself apart from the herd. And when there's so much competition as there is now, and there's such a homogenisation of the industry where everyone's shooting on Alexa Minis, everyone's using Master Primes, the only really viable way of you having your own signature style, setting yourself apart, is to start lighting. When I started my career, it was very hard to find information about cinematography. I mean, you can read some books, and there's some great books out there, of course. I started very much had a desire to work in commercials. I wanted to work on short form pieces of work, and I wanted to sort of have the time to craft things, and I also wanted a lifestyle that didn't demand that I shoot, 12-hour days, 6-day weeks for half the year, because I knew crew members that had had that experience, and they kind of wore me away from that. I think if you're into finessing lighting, then commercials is a really good place to start, because it gives you a full range of experiences that you would not normally get, and also at that time certainly it gives you the budgets to work with equipment that you wouldn't normally get to work with. So when I started my career, I had some peak moments of people seeing something in me that maybe at that time I didn't quite see in myself. And if I sketch my career, if I map my career, then there's very defined peak moments when, like I say, someone had some belief in me. And in a way, that's why I'm here today, because, Dado sort of said to me when I first met him, we had an email correspondence back and forth, and he said, "Oh, I like the way you talk about light," and that inspired me to start writing more about light. And then when we spoke about Lightstream, then that kind of led to this, really. So thank you, Dado, for that. So anyway, at the beginning of my career, I was at a film school. I went to a London film school, and we didn't have a cinematography tutor for the first 2 years. So when we finally got one, she would literally hide from me. I had so many questions, and I'd be asking where she was all the time, and people would say, "I think she's hiding from you, Ian. You have too many questions for her." So I left film school with a real thirst for knowledge, and in particular, I wanted to learn more about lighting, and because I had this idea that I wanted to enter into commercials, I wanted to learn about specialist lighting, car lighting, hair lighting, food lighting, the real kind of specialist areas. So I actually went out and tried to research these subjects, and I was really shocked. This is before the internet, but there was no information at all. You couldn't get any books. I mean, there was a few photography books on glamour photography, and that was it. There was no book on how to light hair, for example. So the way I kind of started my career was through specialisation, and that's kind of gave me a big step up. And the reason I talk about that is it's becoming very important again, because there's such a huge demand in film schools for studying cinematography now. I mean, I heard someone told me a statistic that every year the amount of film school graduates equals the amount of jobs available in the industry. So unless every year everyone retires, then there's not enough work for the people that are graduating. And when I started at film school, I was the only one in my year that wanted to be a cinematographer. I announced in the second year that I was going to be a cinematographer, because everyone at that time thought films were made by directors alone. So people would go to film school and they thought that being a director was was the only real role to be creative. So it was a very fortunate time for me, because it allowed me to kind of really cherry pick the best projects at college. And then when I went on into becoming a professional cinematographer and getting paid for my work, I was on a list of about 20 DOPs in London that were specialising in, at the time I was specialising in hair and beauty, and that's purely by chance. I worked with a director, she wanted to work with me. We became friends, and we kind of did these little side projects, but she was mainly sold, because at the time, in a relatively sexist industry, she was sold, because she was a female director, she was sold purely for beauty commercials. She got me a massive early commercial, and the production company and the client didn't want to use me because I didn't have any experience. But then the producer basically didn't book anyone else and didn't tell them she hadn't booked anyone else, so they ended up having to use me. And that's how I started a whole career. By that one, fortunate event, I ended up becoming a beauty hair cameraman. And it wasn't my design or choice, it just happened that way. But then I realised the importance of specialism, because by virtue of being a beauty cameraman, it allowed me to get my foot into the door of production companies that wouldn't really be interested in working with me at all. But by having an area of expertise, a specialist area, then that's a way of getting you in. It's like having a superpower or something. So my advice now to young DOPs is find some way of standing out, find some way of specialising in something and really make that your own, really focus in. I think it's about deep work in a culture where we're so distracted by so many things, and there's so many things we can do adequately. There's so many people that can do a bit of Photoshop, a bit of Lightroom, a bit of Da Vinci. We're in a culture now where everything can be done adequately, with minimal ease. So I think it's really become important now that you focus on one thing that you can be really good at. You should choose something that you can sustain an interest for at least, as I said earlier, 10 years. It's my theory, 10 years to get to really start to deepen into something and to really start mastering it. So that leads me on to talking about this new generation of cinematographers. So I had a situation whereby I ended up sharing a flat with these 25-year-old cinematographers, and they amazed me. Their marketing ability was amazing. They could basically sell themselves with no real experience and knowledge. They weren't actually technically that capable at all, but they managed to. They just grew up with that generation of Instagram and social media. They grew up with that, so they understood how to sell themselves and how to present the best of themselves. So I ended up living with them for about 6 months, and during that period, they taught me about the importance of social media, and I started trying to teach them about the importance of lighting. In fact, when they were at college, one of the first big arguments we had in the flat was they had access to dado lights at college, but because they were using them, they were giving them to them to use at college, they assumed that they were student lights. So they were saying to me, "Oh, we want to get our hands on some really professional lights," and I said, "Well, you had dado lights. Why didn't you use those?" And they didn't understand how to use these lights properly. And I realised then that the education was really, really important. And it's all very well having access to things, but unless you really know how to use them and spend the time and the care to try and master them, then you're not going to progress. Okay, so going back to what I was saying earlier, this is some of my beauty work. I started off using panoras quite early on, as I mentioned. And this is just a shot with a panora either side. In fact, it was a moving shot. It was she was moving through the lights. It was actually quite kind of poetical image in the end. And then this is another one. So again, as I was discussing earlier, understanding soft and hard and working out the combination of soft and hard. So this is an example here of again panora. It's very soft light, and it's just kind of a very kind of enveloping, wrapping aesthetic where it's just lots of sort of midtones and it's very gentle cosmetic lighting. Here's again another example of a panora. This is slightly more contrasty. So this is an example of single source soft lighting. So it's just a single source of light, and it's just being reflected by her hair back onto her skin. So, and this is an example of a dado eye light. So we're referencing early Hollywood lighting here, and it's just a dado eye light. I can't remember what that is. And this is another dado light, softbox. We shot a whole music video of just one light, actually. It was the little 150 softbox. I can't remember what it's called now, actually, but it's a 150 bulb in a softbox about this size. And we shot a whole a whole music video of that single light. I can show some other frames of that later. This is a Dado 436, which is an incredible little light. It has a tiny bulb, so it can produce incredibly sharp, defined shafts of light. Just made a gobo up out of a piece of black wrap in a V shape, and made this sort of palace of light that the artist would interact with. And then we lit the front of her face with a little Dado 150 Classic. Again, Panora 400D, I think that's coming through the window. That's just bounce 400D again, 400D again. And then it's just some reflected light that we did a nude glassware campaign with. And then here we go, this is a PB70 again. We did an experiment where we just basically got a PB70, stuck it on the ground, and got 2 flags and opened them up. And we produced these lovely effects. That's just the single PB70, just a tiny bit of smoke, and it's the ambience of the smoke that's lighting her. That was the beginnings of my career, and then, as I say, I kind of went into kind of being more of a general director of photography and specialising in food and high speed and trying to sort of experiencing the whole kind of range of different DOP areas, and it sort of led me back. When I had that experience of living with those flatmates, I started realising that I started thinking back a lot to when I was their age and what it was that I wanted when I was a 25-year-old DOP and how hard the knowledge was to come by at that time. And I came up with the idea of starting to sort of break down some of my lighting setups. And so this is now the new era of work for me, and we're calling it Set Notes. So this is one of the campaigns that you saw earlier. So if you just play that, so you saw this earlier. This is the Amazon campaign that I showed you earlier. And then we go forward from there. This is the comments that we got back from it. So which people were showing a lot of interest in the light stream and asking me about 400D. And so we started realizing that we were getting quite a lot of engagement through these. This is another video. One of the videos from the Gymshark piece I showed you earlier. And then again, we got lots of comments, people asking about Lightstream and about what lights we were using. And I started realizing that we're actually building a community here. This is what's happening. It's funny because, as a DOP, it can be a very lonely career. I mean, it's myself and my agent for the last 15 to 20 years. And I never really felt part of a community. Most of the other DOPs, you very rarely spoke to another DOP about work, and as I said, when I started my career, to find knowledge was very hard. What I used to do is, Sarah Dunlop, the director that I worked on the beauty campaigns with, should let me come on set when she was doing the bigger productions, and I'd spy on other DOPs and sort of see what they were doing. And then when I started my own work, what I'd have to do is employ their gaffers. So I'd literally poach their gaffers in order to find out how to do these lighting techniques, because it was such a kind of hidden, secretive world. And to get knowledge was, as I say, impossible. So I was thinking, well, let's start sharing. It's probably time to start sharing that knowledge, right? Because, now, particularly with the internet, at some point, it's all going to be out there anyway. So why not start sharing? And it really doesn't come down to you knowing the tools. It comes down to having the passion to explore them for a long enough period of time to really master them. And I think that if someone really wants to do that, they'll find the information out eventually, so why not just help them with that process? So I started doing these little breakdowns of the lighting that we were using, and that, of course, encompassed the whole light stream thing, because these things were running in parallel. I was starting to set notes as the light stream was starting to take off. So some more comments there, and some more comments there. So what we'll do after we've looked at these comments is we'll go and have a look at a couple of set notes, and I'll show you how we break them down. Right, so here's a live Instagram, my live Instagram feed. Yeah, so I'm going to sit here now. Thank you. So here we go. If I scroll down, it's the history. So the thing that's amazing about Instagram, I mean, I'm a bit of a newbie to this, but what really surprises me is you get kind of like a historical timeline of your work, which is very, very interesting, because people like this a lot. They like to know what you've been doing recently, what you did a few months ago. It's got a kind of nice, kind of very quick sort of slice of your work, kind of a snapshot of what the kind of work you do. And you get to create it yourself, so you can kind of organise, if there's a certain area of work that you want to get into, you can start pushing that forward and try and win, because unfortunately commercials is a very conservative industry, and unless you can demonstrate you can do something, the chances of you getting that are very, very slim. So if you want to go and shoot car commercials, I always say to people, make a short film with a car in it, try and shoot a car somehow, and then the chances are you'll get another car, and then before you know it, you'll be shooting cars. So anyway, so here's some set notes. So I'm going to start with McDonald's, because you saw McDonald's earlier, and it makes sense to show you the set note of McDonald's. So here we go. So what we do is we get a photographer. So now one of the roles of the trainees I use is to be a good photographer. So they don't just get employed for their trainee skills, they get employed for their photography skills. And I try and convince them that what they're actually doing is cinematography, because they're basically telling a story through stills on set, and they're learning about lighting at the same time. I mean, I would have been thrilled personally to have a DOP offering me that opportunity when I was 25 years old, because I would have got to spy on all of the DOPs I could have wanted to, and got paid as a trainee and enhanced my stills all at the same time. So here we go. We usually have a wide shot and we just break it down. There is text, of course, on Instagram at the bottom where we can go into more depth. But basically what we're trying to do is we understand that this Generation Z, it's all about a quick hit and understanding something in a small bite-sized digestible form. So what you've got to try and do is you've got to try and engage them and draw them into the deeper meaning of the work. And you do that by having this little snapshot. So it usually starts with a wide shot, and then we just mention what camera we're using, what lenses we're using, and then we go a little bit more into the depth with the lighting and how we're lighting it. And here you go. So here you go. So now you can see the light stream coming into effect here. And then the lights that we're using and the parallel beams on them and some gels. So it's all broken down. So there's nowhere to hide, basically. Everything's there. It's all out in the open now. And then we show the end result. So that's that one. And then this is another good example here. This is an Nespresso campaign. And this leads me back to the DOP, the new generation of DOPs and the sort of conversations that are going on. By starting to do this work, I'm kind of engaging in a community, and there's a lot of dialogue happening between DOPs now, whereas when I started out, DOPs were like ships passing in the night. Occasionally you'd meet one and you go, oh my God, that's what you look like. I had no idea that's, because you just never saw another DOP, one DOP per film set usually. Now there's like a community of DOPs, and as I said earlier, everyone will borrow equipment off each other, and sort of it's a weird relationship because you kind of, on the one hand, you're sharing things, on the other hand, you're competition, but there's still a sort of a sense of community and a sense of kind of, you all travel along together somehow. One of the discussions I've been having a lot of DOPs at the moment is there's a whole young breed of DOPs that have a fetish for film, right? So my generation is the digital analog generation. I'm at Generation X, which is an equal amount of time as an adult spent in the analog community, analog time, and an equal amount spent in the digital time, which I absolutely love that, because I love the fact that, I grew up with the advent of the first, computer, and now we are where we are now. So I've sort of seen both worlds in a sense. And the young guys that are coming up now, they've never really touched a film camera, or had an opportunity to shoot when we were all shooting on film. So it's become like a weird sort of fetish now. And there's certain young DOPs that go out there and they actually market themselves very successfully on just being film DOPs, which just sort of blows my mind. So they go out there and say, no, I only shoot on film. I know no one shoots on film, but I only shoot on film. So they get very little work, but what they do get is very niche, kind of cool work. That sort of fascinated me for a while, because I must say it took me a long time to get any good at shooting film. It's a kind of a weird sort of understanding of film as well, because they understand 35mm negative to be the film of choice, when if I was actually going to shoot film again, I wouldn't be interested in that. I'd be interested in 16mm or some kind of reversal. Because the thing about 35mm negative is the journey of film was to try and get as faithful reproduction as possible, and the journey of digital was the same, right? So where film ended up was very faithful to the image, and then where video took off was very similar to 35mm film. But if you really want to get into the texture and the soul of what you're doing, then you want to go back to kind of less faithful film stocks, like film stocks that use interesting dyes or have a strong grain or something, because then I think you are getting back into something textural that can't be reproduced easily in like a grading suite. So the argument I'm having at the moment with the young cinematographers, and this is quite relevant to what we're talking about during these seminars, is the importance of lighting. So a lot of young DOPs, what they like to do is they like to either get, like I said, get involved in the fetish of filmmaking and try and get to shoot only on film, or to shoot to a great extent on film, or they like to get into the fetish of lenses, and they like to work with old cinema lenses, old vintage anamorphic Panavision lenses, stuff like that. And their argument is that that's how you get cinematic images. And my argument to them is that obviously there's different equipment that's appropriate to different jobs. And it shouldn't be gratuitous. It should be what's appropriate for the subject matter. However, as I said earlier, light leads everything. So if you really want to get into understanding cinema and producing cinematic images, then it really does start with lighting. And so I get a lot of discussions on here on set notes. They go, oh my God, what lenses were you using? And they expect me to come up with some obscure lens. And it's actually something very, very basic oftentimes. And they're like, well, how did you get that look with that lens? I say, mate, you don't get it. It's not the lens. The lens is a small, the lens does make a difference, but it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. What makes the biggest difference is the lighting. So you guys have got to learn to light and start understanding lighting. That's how you'll differentiate yourself as cinematographers. And as I was saying earlier, if you can specialize, all the better. So by specializing and by lighting, that's how you set yourself apart from the herd. And when there's so much competition as there is now, and there's such a homogenization of the industry where everyone's shooting on Alexa Minis, everyone's using Master Primes, the only really viable way of you having your own signature style, setting yourself apart, is to start lighting. So anyway, so that was Nespresso. So this is a breakdown again. It was a small location, wasn't ideal shooting circumstances, and we were moving very quickly. And we ended up in a kitchen here that you'll see had all kinds of problems because I'll show you the end shot. We had reflection, so all the kitchen cabinets were highly reflective. So to get that end shot there was actually quite difficult, and we could have really only done it with precision lighting. If we're going to use normal lights for that, normal traditional lighting, then we would have been in a lot of trouble and it would have taken a long time. But as you can see, I don't know how you guys feel about that, but to me that it's got the depth of a studio set, It doesn't look like a small location. And you can see from the BTS, they're obviously very wide shots behind the scenes. You can see it's just a standard London house. That's Nespresso. And, we're getting a huge amount of positive feedback. This is a good one as well. This is the Kellogg's Cornflakes campaign. This gives you an example of the precision of dado light and how you can really get texture into shots. This is a tiny kitchen. We lit him with a 150-watt classic dado. So I think the brightest light, we were shooting this during the day as well. So what we had to do is we had to ND the windows down. So I put I think it was 4 stops of ND on the window, which is a 1.2 ND. So that's a huge amount of light reduction. So I did that, and then I bashed a 400D through it. You can see that shape on the cabinets on the back. That's a 400D firing through a huge amount of ND. And by reducing, this is going back to my theory on reductive light. So by reducing everything down and working with precision light, you get to paint. It gets to become a lot more painterly. And as you see from these images, it's quite a painterly image. There's lots of texture there. We like to kind of rake lights along walls and stuff and try and get as much texture out the shape of the set as possible. Well, it's a tiny kitchen, so to get that kind of depth is tricky, but with these precision lights, it's possible. I'll show you one more. Let me show you this one. So this is the KinoFlow Models 1. You saw this earlier. And again, this is the breakdown of all the lights we used. This one got a lot of interest. There's lots of conversations around this. So here we go. All of the dados there. An explanation of why we do things and how we do them. Okay, I'll show you one more. Okay, this is an example of a job. Again, it's like modern production. Rather than being a proper commercial, it's more content nowadays, and so people want to work really quickly, as I mentioned earlier. You don't often get a chance to really choose your locations like you did, and this is a barber shop. This was a terrible location to work in. We didn't even get a chance to see it before we shot, and we had to try and get that. That's the end shot we got out of it. That's a close-up. We were lucky to get anything good out of that, but we managed to pull through. And again, this is a tiny little dentist studio with the lights all crammed into the corner, and we managed to get quite a decent shot out of it as well. So for solving, as I say, for solving modern production problems, it's an absolute dream. I'll just finish up my Instagram with one more piece of work, and this is like, we sent this piece of work out more through a series of images, because this one was all about light. Rarely do you get a job, the DOP, where the subject matter is light. And the director actually, we did a making of with this, and the director said, I only took this job for Ian. I worked with her for several years, and she said, yeah, this one's for you. I've played some of these split screens. So the story basically is about a grandmother who enjoys spending her time with her grandson, enjoying the lights. And then one day she breaks her leg, and she can't go outside and enjoy the lights anymore. And so what happens, I'll go through some of the other sequences. The boy basically goes back to his house here, and he realizes that he can reflect light with mirrors, much like Lightstream, right? That's probably the look Dado gave when he first realized that. And then he goes to his room, he gets all these mirrors, and then finally he finds a way of shining the mirrors down the alleyway. So he shines the light down. And this is quite it was a very satisfying job for me, because the whole argument with production was like, well, you'll never get a shaft of light to be real. You'd have to do it in post. I was like, no, we can definitely do that. We just need the right lights for that. And there you go. You can see a proper shaft of light, no posts required. So that's set notes. Yeah, okay, I could end up very quickly just talking about, there's a UK cinematographer site.
Yes.
This one here, right. So just as a final little conversation, we'll go back to some of my earlier work again, and I can talk a little bit about sort of how I've developed some certain ideas that have led to Lightstream. So this is a relatively big campaign we did for a company called TUI. They did a big rebranding, and as you can see, I'm always interested in trying to get a shaft of light in the image somewhere. And this was a particularly challenging job, because it all had to look like twilight, or just, it had to look like sort of sunset. Well, this one was shot, again, this is about simplicity of cinematography and just really concentrating on the pure elements. So through my career, I tried out lots of different techniques. And the thing that really excites me about Lightstream is the fact it's got a purity to it that I haven't found in any other lighting system. So what I like to try and do is to try and learn something and then reduce it down to its main fundamental kind of elements. It's like, at first I'm trying all the different things out, and then I kind of hone it and refine it and refine it. And these are the jobs that I've been most satisfied with, that process. So this one, I'll just show you these two jobs, because this whole job, this first one you're seeing is a Dove commercial, and it was shot so simply, very, very little intervention with light, and all shot on a 50mm lens, just a Leica 50mm. So this whole job was just one lens. I was just following a mother and a child around a flat. It was almost no budget. This one here was a very early precursor to Lightstream reflectors. It was shot using available light, actually. We didn't use any lighting in this at all, but we just used mirrors. So I would reflect the sky onto their bodies with mirrors. And the reason for that was because the generator broke. So I ended up having to shoot without a generator, and then the director turned around to me and goes, thank God that generator broke. We ended up with a lot nicer campaign, because of that. That's when I started thinking, there's a different way of lighting. We don't have to use these huge lights and make everything look so overlit. So now I'm going to finish up by talking a little bit about this community, this Instagram community, and about how I feel it's kind of like a movement that's happening now. We really are building up a lot of interest around the Lightstream, and like for the first time in my career, I feel that I'm involved with something that's actually bigger than just me and bigger than just my career. It's a tremendous pleasure that I come here and get to sort of share in my last year's experience of having used Lightstream, and we're developing it as we go along. We're always thinking of new ways. At the moment, we're thinking of motorizing some of the mirrors. We're thinking of ways of honing it and making it into the best, most poetic system we can. So yeah, I'm really super thrilled to be part of this process. And make no mistakes, this is a cinematography movement. With what was being spoken about earlier, about this whole need for green now, and for things to be shot in an elegant and simplistic way. Yet we're still managing to hold on to the aesthetics of cinematography and the craft of it. So yeah, thank you for listening.